Welcome and thank you for joining part 2 of Seyfarth's micro-webinar series, Recent Legislative Developments Affecting Washington, D.C. Employers. This installment of the series will focus on requirements of the district's Tipped Wage Workers Fairness Act. All participants are in listen-only mode. You are encouraged to submit questions throughout the program using the Q&A feature in WebEx. However, if your question is not answered, our presenters will follow up with you directly in the days ahead. For those interested in CLE credit, an attendance verification code will be read during the presentation. Please write this code down. It will not be repeated and is required for CLE credit. Copies of the webinar recording and materials will be distributed to attendees following the presentation. At this time, I'd like to turn over the program to Scott Hecker. Scott, you may begin.
Thanks, Brooke. Appreciate it, and welcome everyone to today's micro webinar. I'm Scott Hecker. I'm a senior counsel in our DC office, and I'm here with Ted North, my colleague, also in DC. Hi, Ted.
Doing well. Thank you very much.
If we could go to the next slide, Brooke. So we are here to speak about the DC Tipped Wage Workers Fairness Amendment Act of 2018, and to do that, we'll provide an overview of the act, discussing who is covered, and then some of the additional requirements that we're keeping an eye on as obligations start to come due and DC continues to develop its guidance around this relatively new act. So Ted, I'm going to turn it over to you to hit our first substantive slide.
Sure. And appreciate it, and thank you for everyone joining us today. Hopefully we're accompanying you with lunch and giving you the rundown of the new requirements under the Tipped Wage Workers Act. So Scott mentioned we're mainly covering the requirements today. It went into effect, the act, on December 31st, 2022. It repealed initiative number 77, which, as I'm sure everyone here remembers, was the ballot initiative that was designed to eliminate tipped minimum wage entirely and bring tipped workers up to the non-tipped minimum wage in an incremental fashion. That repealed that ballot initiative and maintained the tipped wage minimum, or the tipped workers minimum wage, while also imposing additional requirements onto employers that employ tipped workers. Specifically, the law has additional requirements, and they can really be broken up into three categories. There are the training requirements, the reporting requirements, and the notice requirements. For training, that includes training on the Minimum Wage Revision Act of 1992, as well as sexual harassment training. For reporting, that includes reporting on instances of sexual harassment, as well as your organization's sexual harassment policy to DC OHR, and as also reporting wages for tipped workers on a quarterly basis. And then for notice, there are certain notice requirements to tipped workers that are required under the law, as well as posting provided DC posters around the workplace. Next slide, please. So first, who is covered? It's a pretty large bucket. As far as employers are concerned, it's essentially every employer with at least one tipped minimum wage employee. For employees, and we've broken them down into a couple of different categories here, and they should make sense. That's going to cover food service workers, anyone in a hotel, restaurant, cafeteria, etc. Beverage staff, anyone working in bars, taverns, nightclubs within DC. Janitorial or building maintenance staff. This is in an office building, institution, or something similar to that. Non-professional employees that perform healthcare. This could be nursing care or working in a hospital or similar establishment. And then any individuals that provide security services, mainly in an office building or an institution or something similar. So moving on to the meat of it, what are the requirements? Next slide, please. First, for notice, certain notice requirements that have to be given to tipped employees. Those are whether or not, we broke them down to three here, whether or not tips not shared, or advise that tips not shared can be retained by the employee. If tips are shared, the employee has to be advised of what the employer's shared tip policy is. And then finally, the amount of percentage of tips that are paid by credit card will be deducted for credit card fees. This also has to be given to employees on the date they start or at any date when these policies change. Next slide. I'm going to hand it over, or actually, I'm sorry, not yet. For training, I know I am handing it over to Scott. My
Yep,
apologies, Scott.
I've
Go
got
ahead.
this one. No, thanks, Ted. Appreciate it. Moving on to some of the training requirements that Ted noted in his overview. Each employer does need to provide annual training on the Minimum Wage Revision Act, and also to receive that training. Sort of a unique one, I think, that a lot of folks are looking at is the sexual harassment component to training. There must be an anti-sexual harassment training course, including how to respond to, intervene in, and prevent sexual harassment by coworkers, management, and patrons. That sexual harassment training course needs to be provided by DC's Office of Human Rights, or you can get certification. A trainer can get OHR certification to provide that training. And the folks, it's again sort of a broad bucket for who needs to receive the training. Current employees have to receive it in person or online within 2 years after the training's been approved by OHR, and then every 2 years after that. New employees have to receive it in person or online within 90 days of hire, unless they have had it in the last 2 years. And again, once they become employees, they need to have it every 2 years. And managers need to complete a live in-person training every 2 years. Owners and operators also need to do complete either a live or in-person training, and that would be every 2 years as well. Again, you're looking at either DC OHR training or employers offering training. And employers, when they offer that training, they're going to need to then certify completion. If they offer it on their own without going through OHR, they need to submit. And the statute says within 30 business days after each employee, manager, owner, or operator has completed the training. But we'll note to you, OHR has put out a number of FAQs specifically targeted to guidance on this sexual harassment training component of the Act. And that those FAQs don't exactly always align with the statutory language. And this is one instance where we have 30 business days here regarding certification under the Act. The FAQs at FAQ 12 ask the question, what is the deadline for employers to report that the training was completed? And the answer says no later than 30 calendar days after completion of the training. That's interesting because it's not what the statute says, which, those of you who operate in DC maybe are used to some sort of discrepancy between, written and practice when it comes to executing on your goals, or your obligations. So somewhat confusing. And of course, we would never counsel non-compliance with a statutory requirement. However, for employers executing this on the ground, these FAQs may be kind of a window into the process, the enforcement approach that DC OHR will be taking. So again, keep an eye on the FAQs as they develop. Some of the deadlines that have been pushed out, including I believe the deadline to comply with training requirements of August 31st of this year. Some of that has not necessarily been done by amending the statute or even issuing regs. These FAQs available through DC OHR's website do provide, again, some additional color, additional guidance, and again, some insight into how we might see enforcement happen when it comes to the statute and its obligations. So keep an eye on that developing guidance as an employer operating in the district. If we could go to the next slide, Brooke. Ted, sorry, go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I know we have a question about where to find trainers or certain trainings for the Minimum Wage Revision Act. And we're going to cover, I just wanted to call it out while we're on the training slide. DC provides a certified list of trainers that can be accessed for employers. We have the link for the landing page for everything at the end of this that will be provided with the PowerPoint deck afterwards. But that list of certified trainers would cover the sexual harassment and the Minimum Wage Revision Act training requirements.
Great. Thanks, Ted. Appreciate that. So here getting into the reporting that Ted also mentioned is one of the buckets of requirements under the Act. There does need to be sexual harassment reporting. The employers need to have a sexual harassment policy, regarding how employees can report sexual harassment to management and to OHR. That needs to be distributed and posted in a conspicuous place. And this policy needs to be filed with OHR. For calendar years 20 and 21, this needs to be submitted by March 31st, as you'll see there at the bottom of this slide. But OHR is only using these documents and information for informational purposes. So there shouldn't be any enforcement activity based on these prior years, 2020, 2021. 2022 also needs to be submitted, needs to have been submitted by March 31. That doesn't have the sort of same limitation about informational purposes. It seems that DC expects this to be stood up in 2022. It's now late May. We're about a month into this. We are not aware of any enforcement activity here yet. Obviously, the training certification requirement we just talked about is a bit later in August. You might think, hey, it would make sense if we had the training before we had to submit our policy, because from the training, we may want to make some revisions. I'd agree with you. But again, this is what the Act says or the guidance says. And so we're just sort of communicating that to you. There may be some enforcement risk. I would hope that it's limited at this point while folks get their footing here. And this is, both the first time employers need to provide this information and also the first time that OHR is going to be receiving it. So there likely is some runway to figure some of these things out before robust enforcement comes into play. Nonetheless, again, be aware of the requirements, keep an eye on the guidance, make sure you're doing your level best to comply. And when it comes to subsequent calendar years, again, March 31 is going to be that date. So for the 2023 year, you'll submit your information March 31, 2024. In addition to that policy, you'll see there that sexual harassment complaints, the number of instances reported to management needs to be submitted, as well as some of the breakdown of the reported harassers and what roles they served. Even if you have zero claims, the FAQs say you got to submit the information. If you had a location operating and it closed down, you need to submit information for that location since 2020. If it was in operation between 2020 and now, you should be submitting that info, even if it closed since. You need to cover the years it did operate. And if you have multiple locations in the district, you'll want to report and submit on each of those locations. If we could go to the next slide. And here we have the quarterly reporting for the wage reports for tipped workers. You need to submit a quarterly wage report to the mayor, certifying that each individual was paid at least the minimum wage. That includes, the report needs to include the employees' names, the wages they received per week during the quarter, total hours worked above the hourly wage, gross wages, total gratuities. And the mayor has actually created a portal for that. It's at www.essp.does.dc.gov. I'm not sure that one is on the resource slide at the end of the page, but I will read it one more time just so folks have it. But it's the portal that you do your online reporting, and employers shall submit online unless it's, there's a hardship there. So it really is the way that OHR and the mayor expect you to submit your quarterly reports through this portal. Again, it's www.essp.does.dc.gov. So that's the portal that the mayor's created. The mayor's also meant to provide reporting requirements training so that employers understand the reporting requirements as well as use of the portal. So you can find that information through DC Gov as well. There's also a requirement that employers need to use a third party to process payroll. Unless you're a hotel employer, they can self-submit wage reports along with a certification of accuracy concerning those reports. So if you're an employer outside the hotel industry, you have tipped employees, at least one tipped employee, as Ted noted. It's a broad scope of coverage here. If you have at least one tipped employee, you should be using a third party to process payroll there. And again, unless you're a hotel where you can self-submit and certify the accuracy. And Ted, I think I'm turning it back over to you for the next slide.
Yes. So next slide, please. Thank you very much. So this is one of the last requirements. It's the posting requirement. And this is a little different. I know I covered notice at the very top regarding certain rights that tipped wage workers have, specifically within tip splitting and tip sharing, things like that. This is a different requirement. It's posting in the workplace. So the mayor's office created a website as well as an updated poster with all of the labor and anti-discrimination laws that are available to DC workers. Employers under this amendment and this act have to display the poster at every break room on the work site and at every area to clock in if you have a physical clocking in area. Employers also have to print the information from the mayor's website, create a binder of that information, and keep it at the workplace so that tipped employees can access that whenever they want. And finally, there's a kind of a currency requirement that every month employers have an obligation to check that website and ensure that any changes are updated within their binder and their materials that they post and provide to employees. Next slide, please. And so finally, for the resources page, this is the main website that we've referenced throughout this presentation that the mayor's office has created. On this website, what you'll find are the FAQs published by DC, the ones that Scott were referencing, and they walk through a ton of different scenarios that are very helpful. A link to the text of the act itself, if there are any specific instances or you just need some light reading in the afternoon you want to go through. This is also answering Kathy's question from earlier. This is where you can find that list of certified trainers, where DC will provide that. It's a list that will cover both the sexual harassment training as well as the Minimum Wage Act training. You're not required to use a trainer from this list. You can use your own trainer and submit that. But this is an easy way for employers to just find the trainer that they need to cover the materials that they need that's compliant with the requirements under the Act. And also, a part of this landing page here provides a link for businesses to self-report both the sexual harassment incidents as well as the policy. I do think it's different than the link that Scott provided earlier, and might be more in the form of a form, not to use the same word twice, but both work to provide both.
And yeah, Ted, just to be clear, just to be clear on the certified list or the list of certified trainers, if you are going to use your own trainer that maybe doesn't appear on that list, that trainer does need to be certified by OHR. The frequency with which that list is updated, it's DC government, so who knows? But make sure that you have documentation if you use someone who's not on that list that they have actually been certified. You do need to use a certified trainer. If the list is not up to date, your certified trainer may not be on it. That should be fine, so long as you can demonstrate that they did go through that certification training provided by OHR.
Great point. A very important one. Thank you. And so I know we've left some time here at the end for any questions. I know this is very requirements heavy. We're in the first year of this, and obviously have passed the initial reporting requirements and coming on the date for the training requirements. But certainly would like to open the floor now if there are any questions that anybody has. And we can go to the next slide. But any questions that anybody has regarding any of the requirements, the definitions of who is covered by the act or anything else like that.
And Ted, I will just jump in real quick to say the link that I was so diligent in reading very slowly twice appears to not be working, at least on my computer. That's not to say it doesn't work. Sometimes we have firewalls, but it probably makes sense to go through the link that Ted mentioned on OHR's website, the link that is there on that resource page. It is a form. It does take you to a form you can fill out online to submit. So, you can hold on to the link I read for posterity. Check it out if you're interested in seeing if it's just my computer that doesn't allow you to get there. But Ted's is probably the better option. Just wanted to double check that while we were on here, and it worked for someone
Oh, perfect.
else. So looks like there are multiple avenues. Again, I must be having a firewall issue with, our firm doesn't want us to deal with DC apparently, but not true. We deal with them all the time. If no one has additional questions, looks like we can give you some time back.
And I actually,
but
I have the
yeah,
CLE
go
code.
ahead.
That
Yes,
I wanna
important.
get out before the
important.
end here. So for those looking for CLE credit, the code for this is SS4483. Again, that's SS4483. And please
S
feel
as
free
in
to.
Seyfarth Shaw, right, Ted?
Exactly.
Yes.
It all comes back around.
Actually, yes, exactly. Brooke, could you go to the last page of our presentation? So here is contact information for both Ted and me. If you do think of any questions after the fact or want to chat offline about the requirements of the Act, please feel free to reach out to us. And again, this deck will be circulated to attendees, to registrants, as Brooke said at the top of the presentation. So you'll be able to refer back to this and anything else on the slides after the fact. Brooke, I don't know if we want to kick it back to you to sign off, but I think we've got our substance communicated, and I don't see any additional questions in the chat.